All right. So, let me lower this a little. Okay. So, I wasn't quite sure how to structure this video, but the NCAA, along with other businesses, places, are afraid of Trump and his executive orders. Now, the reason they're afraid is because he wants to be a dictator, and they're afraid of what he'll do if they don't do what he wants. There are people who are doing the correct thing, suing. Do I worry that how much the Supreme Court is going to let him get away with shit? Absolutely. But let's not just, make it easy for him. I know it becomes hard for the people who are doing the suing, but just, falling over to please the schmuck, not helpful. It's not like you're going to, accomplish much. Now, in this case, the NCAA, instead of listening to their doctors, they are, banning trans women from women's sports. Now, that of course begs the question, what about trans men? Nobody seems to give a damn about trans men. If you have a problem with trans women because of, they're not being really women or whatever, wouldn't you have a problem with trans men? But let's face it, Trump doesn't actually give a shit about women's sports. Hell, he doesn't give a shit about women unless they're willing to have sex with him. How do I know this? Because it's amazing how many people are, thinking, rah, Trump cares about women. Well, he doesn't care about anyone but himself. But in this regard, this is a man who boasted when he was the owner of was it the Miss Teen pageant? Now, the same people who will scream about minors being trans don't seem to give a shit about the fact that this man walked in on a bunch of teenage girls while they were naked, they were undressed, getting ready for whichever part of the pageant it was, or done for the day, or whatever it was. And he was oogling naked bodies simply because they are gorgeous women. Okay, these girls are gorgeous, yes. That doesn't give you the right as a creepy old man to walk in and just oogle them and look at their bodies just because you can. You're the owner, great, so they let you walk in and they let you walk in and look at them. I'm sure the girls were thrilled that you were doing that. But anyway, before I get to the article about how the NCAA is so scared of Trump that they would rather listen to him than their own doctors, let me start off with the basics. And I say that kind of facetiously because most of the people who have a problem with trans people are screaming about basic biology as if that's all there is to biology. Yeah, all these doctors, all these scientists who have studied biology beyond their freshman year were wasting their time. All you needed was basic biology. Who needs to know about anything else or any new developments? Nah, we should just stick to the basics. So, and just the fact that the NCAA has doctors telling them no should kind of tell you that Trump doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, but You could say that about pretty much anything. And why does this chair constantly move on me? But anyway, let me move you up now so I can do that. Yes. So let's just talk about, before we talk about the NCAA and how them and a lot of other businesses and people are so scared of Trump that Trump signs an edict and they're like, okay, we'll do what you say, as opposed to, oh, I don't know, challenging it. Before we get to that and how annoying that is and scary, let us talk about, this is kind of fun, but also it will help people understand that biology isn't as basic as you think it is. Because intersex people exist. And I have seen comments from people who acknowledge that intersex people exist, but don't seem to take the next steps to understand how that's relevant to anything. It's like they know that if they start to think about how intersex people choose whether they're going to be a man or a woman, they somehow instinctively know, deep down they know that if they start down that road, that they'll have to start accepting trans people. And because they want to hate more than understand shit, they stop right there. But anyway, enough rambling for now. Let's get to the first article, which is, this man learned he was intersex in a surprising way. Now he's taking on Trump's two sexes order. And for those who missed it, not only did he create an order saying that there's only two sexes, the way he phrased it make us all female. But anyway, let's get to the article. And for those who want to know, this is from LGBTQ Nation. I think it's LGBTQ, yeah. So, for J. Benton Morton, Donald Trump's Day 1 executive order declared there are only two immutable sexes, male and female, came as a head-spinning shock. It felt like someone had walked up behind me and walloped me over the head with a phone book, Morton said. 8 years ago, the Tennessee native and writer, then 32, endured another slow-rolling trembler when his ancestry saliva sample was flagged. The company wanted to schedule a phone call. I replied within minutes, puzzled as to why in the world this ancestry company wanted to talk to me about my obvious Northwestern European heritage. I'm as white as it gets, Morton wrote in an essay for the Huffington Post. I answered my phone on the first ring. Based on your answers, we've identified a mismatch in your DNA, a company representative told Morton after a long interrogation about his health history and the provenance of his saliva. A mismatch, he asked. Well, she said, searching for the best customer-friendly language. You completed your profile as male, but your DNA appears to be female. Holding the phone to my ear, I laughed nervously, stalling for time while my brain searched for its depths for any remaining knowledge on DNA, Morton wrote. I was taught that boys had XY chromosomes, male genitalia, and high testosterone, and that girls had XX chromosomes, female genitalia, and relatively low testosterone. I didn't know that various combinations of chromosomes, hormones, external genitalia, and internal reproductive structures existed. All the reason why your people who scream basic biology are wrong. I never learned that sex exists on the spectrum, he shared. Morton spent months trying to grasp how I could have female DNA before meeting with a geneticist at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. How do you feel about the word intersex, she asked. Intersex, the geneticist told Morton, is an umbrella term used to describe a wide range of natural variations that can affect things like genitals, hormones, and chromosomes. Sometimes these characteristics are visible at birth, sometimes they appear during puberty, but often they are never physically noticeable. An estimated 5.6 million people in the U.S. may have intersex traits, making them as common as red hair globally. Morton was diagnosed with a disorder of sexual development. I hate that word disorder because that implies there's something wrong with him. No. Specifically, your variation is called XX testicular DSD, the geneticist told him. In Morton's case, that meant the translocation of an SRY gene. Some development of male sex organs had occurred, but my internal functioning was more blurred, including irregular hormone production and likely infertility. As most intersex people are. I don't believe I've heard of an intersex person who wasn't infertile. Ugh. Sorry. Grappling with my health prior to these tests, I'd often felt like something was wrong with me, that parts of me were broken compared to other guys my age, Morton wrote. I couldn't build muscle as quickly. I was usually tired, and my brain seemed to operate differently. Now I had a reason why I didn't fit the typical mold. The diagnosis, Morton wrote, allowed me to receive treatments that provided me with greater energy and quality of life. But more than that, my diagnosis has played a major role in my politics, as I empathize more with people who don't fit typical molds. So, as you can see, there is a greater, even if this doesn't convince you that trans people are not someone to be hated, and that they're just people trying to make their way through the world just like anybody else. This should show you, even if you're understanding, even if you want to erase trans people, the fact that intersex people exist and that they need certain treatments because of things like this, where finding out that they're intersex helps them regain quality of life. I mean, it sounds like he still identifies as a man, but because of his female DNA, the energy that men have and women have are going to be different. Well, for one thing, women, generally have their periods. Obviously, their energy levels are not going to be as high. So there's so much that you can learn from somebody who is intersex. If we go by his executive order that says men are men, women are women, or whatever the fuck that stupid order says, that would prevent someone like him from getting the proper treatment. Because nobody will question, okay, you're a man, or, oh, wow, your DNA is that of a female, so let's, you should start living as a woman, or whatever the hell Trump and his goons would do with someone like this. I'm on the easy to ignore end of the sex and gender spectrums, but many others have more urgent needs that require them to fight daily for healthcare necessities and acknowledgement of their existence. And even those who aren't intersex or transgender should be bothered by the president's order because at a minimum, it allows government interference in private matters. Not to mention that it's just plain cruel. Exactly. Government doesn't know the inner workings of every single person, nor should they. So why should the government dictate who you are, what kind of care you're able to receive. That's just madness. I mean, if you find out that you're intersex or that you need a treatment that is considered bad in some context, you would not be able to receive that treatment. So, yeah, there is a lot to be said for this order that's hella stupid. If sex is strictly defined at birth with no room for changes, actually, he said it starts at conception, but whatever. Men like myself can face challenges in legal recognition, and it opens doors for the government and private companies to discriminate, he said. Exactly. Exactly. DNA proof or not, intersex and trans people are real, and we should believe them, Morton wrote. An executive order effectively declaring the non existence of intersex and trans individuals will never make us cease to exist. It just puts our lives at risk. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, granted, cruelty is the point when it comes to Trump because Trump doesn't actually care about anybody. But I would like to think that most people who are anti-trans because they don't think things through. They don't think about the implications of saying that men are men and women are women, which technically most people would agree with because most trans people see themselves as either men or women. It just so happens it doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth, but they will agree that they're men or they're women. But if we say that sex and gender is just what you see when the kid comes out of the womb, there's more to it than that. Because intersex is a thing. And then there's of course the fact that in this case he's living out his life as a man, doesn't sound like he's changing that distinction. He's still identifying as a man. But even though he finds out that his DNA is female because that's how he feels. Or maybe it was one of those that the doctor or the parents made made a guessing game when he was born. But it sounds like there was no reason for anybody to think he was intersex. So you can't necessarily just look at genitalia and say, yep, that's a boy. Or yep, that's a girl. Because there's so much more to it. You do not see a person's chromosomes looking at them. I mean, you can make a good guess that I have XX chromosomes and that my brother has XY chromosomes because I am a woman, he is a man. You can make that guess, but until someone tests, you don't know for sure. I mean, I don't see myself in many ways as a typical female in the gender roles realm of it. But that should make no difference. So this idea that boys are born boys, girls are born girls doesn't always work. I mean, there was this one runner. Sorry, I had to move my chair. There was this one middle distance runner, I think, possibly middle distance long-ish runner. Can't remember her name. From an African country, but I can't remember the details. Who was probably born intersex. But she grew up as a woman. She was raised female. and she competed with women. It turns out that there were questions about her abilities. And she was completely clueless. It's not like she was trying to hide anything. She was probably like this guy, where, she grew up with one truth and then genetics showed a different truth. Well, obviously, how she feels is going to trump genetics. And by feel, I don't mean the just, oh, this person's icky type feeling. I'm talking about something so deep rooted, because there are there are structural reasons for that you just do not understand. Some people would call it, I guess, a soul. I don't know. But there are structural differences in a male brain and a female brain. There is such a thing as XY female. There obviously now is if it's, well, yeah, XX male in this case. So you would be barring him from basic treatments like, okay, you're XX male, but because you're XX, this is the reason why you're tired all the time. This is why this happens. This is why that happens. And you can put your treatments based on what is happening to this person, because you have better understanding. Under Trump's stupid order, you couldn't do that, because there would be no question whether this person is male or female, because we have to go by looks, apparently. Or I have no idea if he has XX chromosomes, what the dipshits would do. Would they force him to transition so he looks more like a woman because that matches his genetics? I honestly have no idea. I don't think they do, because they didn't think that hard or at all. Because if they did, they would know that there would be a problem with that. But anyway, that is the first article I have for you. So now let's get to the NCAA being a bunch of butts. So, NCAA bans trans women from sports without even consulting its own doctors. Now, think about this, and also in relation to the story I just read. If basically they're saying that we aren't going to follow actual science because our president is a total dipshit, but he has power, so we're afraid of him, because God knows what Elon will do to them if, since Elon is trying to gain complete control of every aspect of everybody's lives, because he's butthurt that there are certain agencies that regulate his companies and he doesn't like it. So they're afraid. Now, I'm not saying they don't have a reason to be afraid, but just, falling over and letting Trump and his goons do whatever they want, not helpful. That's not going to save you. All I can remind you people of is the freaking Holocaust poem. Read the damn Holocaust poem and explain to me how just bending over and doing what an aspiring dictator wants is going to be beneficial for you in the long run. Maybe in the short term, but definitely not in the long run. All right. The board of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA, reportedly didn't consult with its own medical consultants before voting to ban all transgender women from women's sports on Thursday. And as I've mentioned many, many times, there is so much nuance to this that it's not even funny. But we're talking a bunch of people who aren't interested in thinking and nuance. They just want to do blanket this, blanket that, because in their world, everything is black and white. There is no in between. The NCAA's subsequent announcement marked its advanced compliance with President Donald Trump's executive order threatening to persecute any colleges that allow trans female athletes on women's teams. Now, that's all well and good, but as we saw with this example with this guy who turned out to be intersex and had no clue, what do you do about that? Are you going to still are you going to still persecute these colleges because they didn't even know? Or what about those people who people are so sure are trans because they are too strong to be women or something? What are you going to do with that when it turns out that they're actually cis? They just actually happen to be strong. Or what in order to become part of a team, you now have to go undergo genetic testing? I mean, how invasive is that? Why? Just let people tell you who they are. Because Trump sure as hell is telling everybody who he is. And unfortunately, almost half the country didn't believe him. I'm hoping that almost half the country didn't believe him instead of the more depressing thought that they just agree with him. But anyway, the NCAA's previous policy allowing trans athletes to compete based on the criteria used by the governing bodies of individual sports. However, on Thursday, NCAA President Charlie Baker, who is also the former Republican governor of Massachusetts, said President Trump's order provides a clear national standard. No, it doesn't. That would best serve today's student athletes instead of a patchwork of conflicting state laws and court decisions. Okay, so which is it? Are we raw states' rights? Or are we pro federal government and specifically pro Trump? That Trump can do and say whatever the fuck he wants. Because think about it. What this person is saying is that let's not follow state laws. Let's not listen to the courts. The only person we should listen to is dear leader. How frightening is that? That this country, which was built literally on the foundations of being anti-monarchy, is like, yep, that sounds good. Let's just go with a dictator. Sounds perfectly good to me. Baker was referring to the fact that over a dozen states have laws banning trans female athletes from college and university sports teams, and eligibility criteria differs between sports. The NCAA's new trans ban is effective immediately, though its policy still allows trans male athletes to compete if their sports governing bodies allow it. And my question is why? Why do trans men get a pass but trans women don't? And the reason is that it's people want to either they want to not protect women but actually control women. So that's one. And two, they have built up this boogeyman of what it means to be a trans woman so much that they have to ignore trans men. Because they haven't created a boogeyman about trans men. So they have to pretend they don't exist. Now, like I mentioned, this is very nuanced, and the reason different sports teams have different eligibility criteria is because some sports are based on raw strength, Some sports are based on other qualities, whether it be, using your brain or artistry or whatever sport you happen to be in. So, teamwork, there could be so many sports that that being trans women, even if they went through male puberty, wouldn't confer them any amount of advantage. Then there are some sports that, you know, if you went through male puberty, there might be something there. There have been studies that have claimed that there's something there. But then there are women who didn't go through male puberty. Well, if they didn't go through male puberty, then they didn't get the advantage that people are claiming that trans women have. So, how is a blanket ban helpful to anybody? I will once again use the example of Mac Beggs. He was a high school wrestler, trans man. But because his state prohibited trans men from men's sports, they had a rule that said that you have to compete in the sport that you were assigned at birth. So if you were born female, you have to compete in women's sports. Even if you, in his case, have taken hormones, you look like a man, you have the strength of a man, and you are just beating women left and right. And by the way, he absolutely hated it. He wanted to compete with men. And one of the reasons I use that example is because so many transphobes have used that as an example as to why what they're saying is right, that men shouldn't compete with women, completely ignoring the fact that this is a trans man, not a cis man, pretending to be a woman, which he obviously was not. I mean, it was an obvious, which makes me think that people who are also transphobes genuinely think that they can identify a trans woman because they think that, I don't know if they've watched Bosom Buddies or if they've watched other shows or movies where cross-dressing is a thing, and because they know that this person is a man wearing a dress, that somehow that means that they can always tell. Or they're so scared of trans women that they insist they can. I have no idea. But it is just maddening. All right, back to the article. In a letter published Thursday and addressed to the NCAA president, Baker, Dr. Jack Turbin announced his resignation from the NCAA's Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sport. Turbin told The Hill that neither he nor other committee members were given advance notice of the board's vote to ban trans women before publicly announcing it. In an open letter to Baker, Turbin wrote, "Unfortunately, your recent decision to issue a blanket ban on trans female participation in women's sports does not align with medical or scientific consensus. I cannot, in good conscience, participate in this kind of politicization of science and medicine at the expense of some of our most vulnerable student athletes." Now, and that's the other thing about people who are screaming, well, basic biology. You are literally saying that you know better than medical associations, that you know better than science. I'm sorry, what? This is probably why so many of these people hate experts, because they're so convinced that they know better than the experts that they feel like we don't need expertise in anything. I'm sorry. Yeah, you do need expertise in things, in everything. I mean, I doubt that if you need a plumber that you're going to just call any old schmo or grab someone off the street to do your plumbing. So, in some regards, you understand experts are needed, but somehow when it comes to science, because you're so convinced that what you learned in your freshman year of biology is everything you need to know, but with everything else, you accept that people learn stuff in the 30 years or whatever it's been since you've been in school. But yet for science, it's different. It's just beyond bizarre. Okay. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that Trump's order would begin a very public pressure campaign on the NCAA and the U.S. Olympics Committee to ban trans athletes, but neither is required to follow executive orders because neither receives federal funding and executive orders are not self-executing. Which is another point. Why are people who are not under the purview of executive orders bowing down to this? Obviously, we know why this dipshit is, because he's a tried and true Republican, even though he's not representing any constituency anymore. So he's just going to reflexively listen to the head of his party, because apparently few Republicans actually possess spines anymore. But at least Caroline Leavitt admits that, there's only so much this executive order does. Either that or she was forced to admit it by a journalist who actually knows what the hell they're talking about. Not sure. Haven't watched the press conference. Trump's orders also threaten to individually prosecute schools that allow trans women on women's teams or in women's restrooms and locker room facilities. So the NCAA's policy change may signify an attempt to forestall any prosecution that Trump could have instigated against schools hosting trans-inclusive teams and games. What about creepy old men who like to oogle girls? Where's the executive order preventing that from happening? The NCAA covers 1,100 colleges and universities with over 530,000 student athletes, Baker said, though he estimated that only 10 athletes in the entire association identify as trans, a number accounting for less than 0.002% of NCAA athletes nationwide. And let's see, 0.002%. Seriously. 0.002%, and we're going after them. We're not going after important things. We're going to go after the tiny minority of people who, want to play sports because you want to feel tough. Like I said, again, why is this not happening to trans men? I wonder if those 10 athletes include trans men or if it's just trans women. Because if it's both, then it's even less. So seriously, what are we doing here, people? In a social media post praising the NCAA's decision, Trump wrote, "Men should have never been allowed to compete against women in the first place." Spoiler alert, they're not. But I am proud to be the president to save women's sports. If it weren't for the fact that trans women were competing, you wouldn't give a shit about women's sports. We expect the Olympics Committee to also use common sense and implement this policy, which is very popular among the American people and the entire world. That's not the flex that you think it is. Okay, it's popular amongst the American people because most of them don't understand how basic science works, or any science for that matter. I seriously think I live amongst dumb shits. Do I understand the ins and outs of gender ideology and genetics and all that? No. But I understand enough to know that I'll leave it to the experts to decide what is and isn't reality. Because that's why they're experts. That's why they have the degrees. That's why they study this stuff. I'm not going to listen to some real estate developer who can't even do that well to tell me how biology works. Just because he has an uncle who is a scientist, it's just bizarre. In response to Trump's trans sports ban, Rodrigo Hang Lettinen, executive director of Advocates for Trans Equality, wrote, "This executive order isn't about protecting women and girls in sports. It does nothing to address the real issues facing women and girls in athletics, such as unequal access to funding and facilities, abuse by coaches, physicians, and other trusted adults, and the unconscionable gender pay gap in professional sports. This executive order targeting trans children is part of Trump's campaign to erase transgender people from public life." Exactly. I mean, all you have to think about is the Larry Nassar situation. He didn't prey on male athletes. He preyed on girls, little girls. But let's go after trans people because they're the real creepers? Are you kidding me? They're not the creepers. Like I've stated many, many times, just like most cis people are straight, most trans people are too. So most trans women aren't interested in women. So why the hell would they creep on other women when that doesn't even remotely interest them? Like I said, these people who are doing this don't bother to think, because if they did bother to think even a little bit, they would realize how absolutely stupid this is. And if you have a problem with the idea of your daughter sharing a locker room with a trans girl, I'm pretty sure that you've used a restroom with a trans person and never noticed, because it's not as obvious as you seem to think it is. It's like these transphobes have this idea in their head of what a trans woman looks like. And because they're so convinced that they look like men, that they just happen to wear a dress or something, that they refuse to accept that most trans people at least attempt to pass. There might be some who don't, whatever you consider passing. There might be some that don't pass. Hell, I've known cis women who wouldn't pass based on what these transphobes seem to think women should look like or what men should look like. They want people so badly to look like what they think women should look like and what men should look like, that if anybody looks slightly different, like men with long hair, women with short hair, women who wear pants, women who don't wear makeup or don't wear jewelry, I have no idea what they consider to be a real woman or a real man. But that also affects cis people. Like that San Diego State volleyball player. She has not actually come out and said whether she's trans. We just have former athletes plus her current captain. Well, she's probably graduating, so not current anymore. Saying that this woman is trans. And why do they say that? because of how strong she is. Because obviously, who's ever heard of a really strong volleyball player? It's just nuts. What if it turns out that this woman is truly a woman? All you're doing is ruining her life by convincing people she isn't who she says she is, simply because you have this idea in your pea brains what a woman should look like, or how she should act, or how strong she should be. These sports test for things like testosterone, so you don't have too much of it. So, and that applies for both men and women and cis athletes, not just trans athletes. So why are we picking on trans athletes? Because this is a popular boogeyman right now. If we scapegoat trans people, people will not think about the important things that are being not talked about, not just in women's sports, but in general. Let's not talk about the fact that Elon Musk has access to sensitive information. Let's not think about the fact that entire agencies are being gutted because, Trump wants yes men everywhere. And when I say yes men, I literally mean men. He probably just wants white men because he's also anti-DEI, which we all know means that the only people who are capable of having any merit in any field are cis, straight, white men. There couldn't possibly be anybody else who has any competencies in any field whatsoever. The rest of us are just certified dumb shits, and we should just sit at home and drool. And that's the stuff he wants to get your mind off of. Let's not think about the rich people who are trying to get themselves richer at your expense. Let's have you concentrate on the people who are vulnerable. So you can hate on all these other people instead of those that actually matter. But anyway, that is all I have for this video. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.